There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes from being loved, for a version of yourself that isn't quite real. I lived that loneliness for 7 years, and I didn't even realize it until the day everything collapsed. My name is Lauren. I was 34 years old, a director of operations at a logistics company I had helped build from the ground up. I was good at my job, quietly, consistently, relentlessly good, and the salary that came with it, $130,000 a year, reflected exactly that. My husband Thomas did not know that number. He knew I worked in operations. He knew I had a good job. He knew I left early and came home late and sometimes took calls on weekends. But the specific number, the full weight of what I had built, he had never known. And I had chosen that, carefully, deliberately. Thomas was a proud man, not arrogant, just proud. The kind of man who had grown up watching his father provide for his family and had quietly decided that was the definition of a good husband. When we married, he earned more than me. He paid the larger share of our bills. He held that role with a quiet dignity I genuinely respected. But over the years, as my career grew, the gap shifted. And I watched slowly, as Thomas began to sense it, without ever knowing the full truth. A tightness around his jaw when I mentioned a work trip. A silence when I came home from a promotion dinner. Small things. Things I told myself didn't matter. So I protected him. I kept my salary vague. I moved money carefully between accounts. I let him believe the balance between us was still close. Looking back now, I understand what I was really doing. I wasn't protecting him. I was protecting the version of our marriage that felt safe. The version where he never had to confront something that might break him. But some things cannot be protected forever. The first sign came on a quiet Sunday evening in November. Thomas was distracted over dinner, distant in the particular way that means someone's mind is somewhere it isn't ready to share. I asked him twice if everything was okay. Both times he said yes. He was lying, but what I didn't know that evening was that Thomas had already made a decision he had been building toward for months, a decision that would change everything, and that would eventually force the truth I had been so carefully keeping hidden into the brightest possible light. 3 weeks after that Sunday dinner, Thomas sat across from me at our kitchen table and told me he wanted a divorce. He was calm, prepared, like he had rehearsed it several times in the car. On the way home, he used words like growing apart and different directions, and I think we both know this hasn't been right for a while. I sat very still, the kind of still that happens when shock is too large to move through all at once. Is there someone else? I asked. He hesitated, just for a second, but I had known this man for 10 years, and that second told me everything. Her name, I found out later, was someone from his gym. Young, uncomplicated. Someone who looked at Thomas the way he needed to be looked at. Someone who didn't out-earn him. Someone who made him feel like the most capable person in the room. I didn't fall apart that night. I went to bed, stared at the ceiling for hours, and felt something move through me that I can only describe as clarity. The fog of trying and of adjusting and protecting and shrinking lifted completely. And what was left underneath it was something sharp and very, very focused. I called my lawyer the next morning. What followed over the next several weeks was a quiet education for Thomas in exactly who he had been married to. The financial disclosure process in divorce proceedings is thorough. Every account, every asset, every income source, all of it, laid out clearly and completely before both parties and their legal teams. I remember the exact moment Thomas saw my salary for the first time. We were in a conference room, lawyers on both sides. Documents spread across the table. His lawyer slid a financial summary across to him. I watched his eyes move down the page. I watched them stop. He looked up at me slowly. I held his gaze and said nothing. "This is your salary?" he asked quietly. "It has been for 3 years," I said. The silence in that room was heavy enough to feel. His lawyer leaned over and whispered something. I saw Thomas close his eyes briefly. The way people do when they realized the calculation they made was based on entirely wrong numbers. He had walked into that room expecting a straightforward exit. He had assumed, based on everything, he thought he knew, that he held the stronger financial position, that the settlement would lean in his direction. He had assumed completely wrong. The settlement process took 5 months. It was not easy. Nothing about it was easy. But it was fair. Genuinely, legally, documentably fair. The house we had built together, that I had contributed to quietly and consistently for years, was factored correctly. The assets Thomas had always considered primarily his were recalculated in light of the complete financial picture. What he walked away with was significantly less than what he had planned for when he decided to leave. I heard through mutual friends that he had been shocked, that he had told people he hadn't realized, that he genuinely hadn't known the full picture of our finances. And I believed him. That was the most painful part, honestly. He hadn't been calculating. He had simply never looked closely enough. He had loved the version of me he was comfortable with, and never thought to look deeper. The woman he had chosen to leave for someone simpler had been quietly extraordinary the entire time. I moved into a new apartment in January. Clean lines, big windows, entirely mine. I bought every piece of furniture myself, not out of bitterness, but out of joy. The quiet, private joy of building something that belongs only to you. Thomas reached out once, about 2 months after everything was finalized. A short message. I didn't know. I should have known. I'm sorry. I read it twice. Then I put my phone down and made myself a cup of coffee and sat by my window and watched the city for a long time. I didn't respond. Not out of anger, simply because there was nothing left to say. Here is what I want you to hear. If you are somewhere, right now feeling unseen by someone, who should be paying attention. Being quiet about your strength does not make it smaller. It just means the right people haven't looked carefully enough yet. Thomas made his choice based on a version of me that was never the whole truth. And when the whole truth came out, it was too late for him to do anything but face it. I spent years making myself smaller so he could feel larger. I will never do that again. My husband never knew my salary until it was too late, and that changed everything.